You're just maintenance staff. People like you don't belong in executive spaces." That sentence, it wasn't whispered. It was said out loud, in front of a full room of airport personnel, executives sipping coffee, and a few travelers who paused mid-sip just to stare. At 7:03 a.m., Denver time, a man walked into the executive wing of Denver International Airport. He was dressed in a faded navy blue coverall, boots still dusty from the tarmac. No Rolex, no silk tie, no briefcase, just a clipboard in one hand and a security clearance badge on his chest. And then it happened. Terrence Mason, the head of airport security, stormed toward him like he'd spotted a trespasser. Without a single question, without checking a thing, he ripped the man's badge off, shouted something about protocol and trespassing, and ordered him to be removed. His assistant, Shelley, chimed in too. He probably snuck in while they were cleaning. Look at those boots. Here's the twist they didn't see coming. The man they just humiliated? He's not a janitor. He's not maintenance. He's Julian Brooks, billionaire investor, retired Air Force colonel, and chairman of the Denver Aviation Authority, the governing body that oversees the entire airport. And in just under 42 minutes, he would shut down the entire terminal, fire 6 staff members on the spot, launch a full investigation into racial profiling, and trigger a national conversation that would trend under the hashtag Denver Disgrace. But at that moment, nobody knew. Nobody cared. They just saw a black man in dusty boots and decided he didn't belong. And now, the internet's watching. Security footage, cell phone videos, and secret recordings from a brave intern are all about to surface. What unfolds in the next 30 minutes is going to flip power on its head. Live, viral, and raw. So if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been judged before you had the chance to speak, this story is for you. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop your city in the comments. Because this isn't just another travel horror story. This is what happens when power wears work boots. Let's go back to the beginning. Denver International Airport. 7 a.m. sharp. The sun hadn't fully broken the skyline, but the executive terminal was already humming with life. Leather shoes clicking against polished floors, morning lattes foaming behind the glass of the cafe bar, quiet emails tapping across sleek MacBooks. This was the world of top-tier executives, VIP travelers, and high-ranking personnel, where silence was expensive, and eye contact came with intent. No one in this space was ever questioned. Unless, of course, they didn't look like they belonged. And that's exactly why Julian Brooks came dressed the way he did. No tailored blazer. No polished shoes. No staff trailing behind him with clipboards and iPads. Just a plain Denver Aviation Authority coverall with his name stitched into the chest, dusty work boots, and a worn leather tool bag slung over one shoulder. From a distance, you'd peg him as one of the dozens of maintenance techs who come and go through side entrances, fixing power boxes and restocking supplies. But Julian wasn't there to fix a panel or tighten a bolt. He was there to fix a system. Julian Brooks wasn't just another contractor. He was the newly appointed chairman of the board for Denver Aviation, the authority responsible for over $2.7 billion in airport operations, construction, and oversight across the entire central United States. Former Air Force colonel, MBA from Wharton, decorated for leadership under pressure, and more recently, a quiet billionaire who had a habit of investing in what people overlooked: infrastructure, clean energy, transportation systems. But today wasn't about policy. Today was personal. Because over the past 6 months, Julian had received more than a dozen anonymous reports from internal employees, workers of color, women, LGBTQ+ staff, all describing the same thing. They were being watched, followed, stopped, questioned, sometimes even barred from their own workplace lounge because they didn't fit the executive image. So, Julian decided to test it. No PR team, no cameras, just him, and the uniform that got ignored. To see what would happen when no one recognized the man holding the keys to their careers. And what happened next proved every report true. Let's go there. It started the moment Julian walked through the frosted glass doors of the executive wing. The air changed. Not for him, but around him. 3 receptionists looked up from behind the white marble counter. One whispered something under her breath. Another blinked, like trying to place a face that didn't match the uniform. The third just stared, the kind of stare you give someone when you're trying to figure out if they're lost or lying. Julian offered a polite nod and kept walking. He wasn't there to be greeted. He wasn't there to ask for permission. He scanned his badge. Real, valid, fully credentialed. The gate clicked open. And that's when Terrence Mason showed up. 6'2", clean-shaven, muscles stretching the seams of his fitted security uniform. Terrence wasn't just any airport security. He was head of operations for the executive terminal, a man known for keeping order, which more often than not meant keeping certain people out. He moved fast, aggressive, like Julian had triggered a silent alarm. "Hey, stop right there." Julian did. Terrence's voice carried across the lounge like a warning shot. "I don't know how you got in here, but this area's restricted. This lounge is for authorized staff and executive partners only." Julian calmly held up his badge. Terrence didn't look at it, didn't scan it, didn't even pause. Instead, he waved over his assistant, Shelley Harper, early 30s, blazer too tight, attitude tighter. She strutted in, heels clicking like judgment. Shelley took one look at Julian and smirked. "Did someone leave the service entrance unlocked?" she asked. "Probably just wandered in while they were cleaning." Julian said nothing. He didn't need to. "I'm going to have to ask you to step outside," Terrence continued. "You're clearly in the wrong place." "My badge scanned green," Julian replied, his tone even but firm. Terrence snatched the badge from his chest and held it up to the light like it might melt in his hands. "Fake," he said flatly. "We've seen stuff like this before. Maintenance workers printing fake IDs to sneak in for free coffee and snacks." Julian's jaw didn't clench. His eyes didn't narrow. He just stood still, like someone who's heard this exact story too many times before. Shelley leaned in. "Next time, try using a different name. Julian Brooks, please." That sounds made up. And there it was. The moment where ignorance turned into insult. A couple across the lounge looked up from their tablets. One traveler started filming. Another whispered, "Isn't that the guy from the city board meeting last month?" But Terrence didn't hear them. Or didn't care. "Sir, either exit the premises now or we'll have you escorted out. Your little costume trick doesn't work here." Julian looked around the room. The silence was heavy. And then he said just one sentence. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" Terrence scoffed. Shelley rolled her eyes. "No," she snapped. "And we don't care." That was their biggest mistake. There's a difference between being dismissed and being publicly humiliated. Julian had expected resistance. That's why he wore the uniform. That's why he walked in alone. But what he didn't expect, what even he hadn't prepared for, was how quickly disrespect would turn into a full-on performance. Terrence stepped forward, now chest to chest with Julian, his voice sharper, louder, designed to draw attention. "Step away from the glass," he barked, waving toward the entrance. "You're not supposed to be here, and we're not going to ask again." People were watching now. Phones were being held low, half-hidden, but recording. The room had shifted. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was hostile. Shelley folded her arms, leaned in dramatically, and added fuel to the fire. "I don't care what that badge says. That's not how real clearance looks. We've had fake credentials come through before, especially from people trying to get into this lounge for free breakfast. You don't look like any executive I've ever seen." Julian remained still, stoic, not passive, intentional. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out a second form of ID, his federal transport license, issued through the Department of Homeland Security, one that clearly listed his full name, title, and role with the Denver Aviation Authority. Terrence didn't take it. He didn't even glance at it. Instead, he muttered, "Anyone can print one of those online." Shelley laughed. "My cousin could Photoshop that in 5 minutes." Then it got worse. Without warning, Terrence slapped the badge and ID out of Julian's hand, sending them sliding across the polished floor. The sound echoed, metal skidding against tile. A few people gasped. "You want to act like you're someone important?" Terrence sneered. Let's see how important you are when security drags you out." From behind the reception desk, a young woman flinched. She looked over at a wall-mounted screen showing the security feed. The scan log clearly showed Julian's badge turned green on entry. Approved, authenticated. She hesitated. That hesitation didn't go unnoticed. Across the lounge, a young intern named Mina Park, barely 24, on her second week, reached for her phone and discreetly tapped record. She had heard rumors during orientation. Stories about how certain employees, especially black men, immigrants, and blue-collar staff, were treated differently if they didn't wear the right kind of clothes. She thought it was exaggeration. But now, she was watching it happen, in real time, to the most powerful man in the building. Shelley leaned in close to Julian's face, dropped her voice, and said coldly, "You should have entered through the back like the rest of your kind." Julian blinked. Just once. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. But he looked her dead in the eye and said, "You just made a career-ending mistake." Shelley rolled her eyes again. "You threatening me?" Julian shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I'm just stating a fact." And with that, he picked up his phone and made the call that would change everything. Julian didn't yell. He didn't shove anyone. He didn't argue. He simply stepped back, calm as ever, reached into his tool bag, and pulled out his phone. Terrence and Shelley laughed. "You gonna call your supervisor?" Shelley smirked. "Go ahead. Maybe they'll give you a fresh mop and bucket." Julian didn't look at them. He didn't need to. He scrolled to a contact labeled Harriet Coleman, legal, and hit dial. The call connected instantly. "Julian." Harriet's voice was sharp, professional, awake. "Activate Protocol Red," Julian said, his tone cool, deliberate. "Have the board on standby. Tell David, Sarah, and James we've got a live incident unfolding at Denver International. Start pulling internal access logs for the executive lounge, 7:04 a.m. onward." "Understood," Harriet replied. "Do you want the press briefed?" "Not yet," Julian said. "Let them hang themselves first." He ended the call. Terrence was staring now, unsure. That name, David, sounded familiar. James, too. These weren't the kinds of names a janitor would casually throw around. "Okay," Terrence said, voice losing a bit of its earlier bark. "Who exactly do you think you are?" Julian finally looked him in the eye. "I don't think," he said. "I know." Just then, Mina Park, still recording from across the room, received a notification from the security app on her work tablet. A private message from her mentor in IT. The message read, "Is this about Julian Brooks? I just saw the name flagged on the system. He's not just VIP. He's the chairman of the entire board." Mina's hands shook slightly as she read the words. She looked back toward Julian. It made sense now. The confidence, the poise, the calm. He hadn't come here to argue for respect. He had come to observe who gave it freely, and who didn't. Julian walked slowly to the badge scanner at the entrance, the same one he'd used earlier, and waved over the receptionist. "You saw it scan green?" he asked gently. She nodded nervously. "I did. It was green. I swear it was green." "Good," Julian said. "That's all I needed to confirm." Then he turned to the room, now half full of silent onlookers, unsure what they were witnessing. Julian tapped his phone again and sent a voice message directly to the board's secure channel. "This is Brooks. I've confirmed credential manipulation. Public humiliation in front of witnesses. Audio and video assets are being captured. Stand by for escalation." The lounge had gone cold. Terrence no longer looked like a man in control. He looked like a man wondering how far down he was about to fall. Shelley leaned toward him and whispered, "Why does his name sound so familiar?" Julian turned toward them both and said quietly, "You'll remember it by the end of the day." Then he walked to the center of the lounge, looked around at the now attentive faces, and said something no one expected. "Let's see how many people in this room believe in treating strangers with respect before they find out who they are." No one answered, but plenty of them would soon regret staying silent. It only takes one voice to break the silence. But when the right voice speaks up, others follow. Julian stood calmly in the center of the lounge, his presence suddenly commanding, even in work boots and a coverall. Around him, eyes darted between phones, tablets, and the nearest exit signs. No one quite knew what to say, but a few knew what they needed to do. And the first was Mina Park. She stepped forward from the corner where she'd been recording quietly. Her voice trembled just slightly, but her posture was steady. "I saw it," she said loud enough for the room to hear. His badge scanned green. "I was 3 feet away from the terminal." The system cleared him. Terrence turned. "Excuse me? Who even are you?" "Mina Park," she replied. "Engineering intern. Terminal systems rotation. I was scheduled to shadow ops this week." Shelley scoffed. "Intern? Please. Sweetheart, this is way above your pay grade." Mina didn't flinch. "That might be true," she said, "but integrity isn't tied to salary." Her words hit like a soft slap. The room shifted again, not in volume, but in tone. A man in the far back, early 40s, suit jacket folded over one arm, cleared his throat and stepped forward. "I'm Jason Carter. I've been flying in and out of DIA for 9 years. I've used this lounge every month since 2018, he began. And I've seen this kind of thing happen before. Quietly. To people who didn't look like they belonged." Julian met his eyes. Just a small nod. No words. Then came another voice. "Same," said Lamar Dorsey, an airport logistics contractor wearing a reflective vest and holding a lunch bag. 2 months ago, I came through this lounge for a scheduled vendor meeting. Same security lead, same woman over there. They accused me of stealing someone's badge and threatened to call TSA. He looked directly at Terrence. "You don't remember me, huh? You called me delivery guy, even after I showed you my work order." Terrence's jaw tensed, but he didn't respond. The room wasn't on Julian's side yet, but it was no longer on Terrence's either. And then came the moment no one saw coming. From behind the check-in counter, the young receptionist, Emily Vasquez, 26, Latina, hired just under a year ago, raised her hand. "I have access to the entry logs," she said, voice small but audible. His badge wasn't just green. It was pre-cleared with executive override. That means his entry wasn't just allowed. It was prioritized. Mina looked at her tablet. "That's what I saw too. You can cross-check it." Emily nodded. "I already did." Shelley tried to step in, waving it off. "This is getting ridiculous. You're seriously going to believe interns and desk staff over the head of terminal security?" Jason Carter turned toward her slowly. "No," he said. "We're going to believe the truth." Julian didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply turned toward the lounge doors and muttered quietly, 5 voices in 5 minutes. Imagine how many stories never got told. Now, they were all listening, and the truth was only getting louder. The moment the truth starts rising, someone always tries to bury it. And that's exactly what happened next. Back behind the front desk, Shelley Harper tapped her touchscreen tablet with quick, shaky fingers. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes scanned rapidly through the terminal entry logs. Julian's name was there. Clear as day. Pre-authorized. Green status. Priority access. And then, in less than 5 seconds, it was gone. She had manually deleted the log. She thought no one saw, but Mina did. From her vantage point a few steps away, Mina caught the flash of the screen as Shelley swiped through the dashboard. She wasn't an engineer yet, but she knew the system interface. She'd trained on it just last week. She watched Shelley highlight Julian's name, hit the 3-dot menu, and select Remove from Event Record. And in that moment, the real story changed. This wasn't just about bias anymore. This was cover-up. Intentional. Active. Malicious. Mina turned toward Julian, who was still standing calm in the center of the room, phone in hand, silent, watching. She whispered, "She's deleting the logs." Julian didn't move, but he heard her. At the same time, on the far end of the lounge, Emily Vasquez froze as she noticed her access panel suddenly blink. The green scan history for Julian's badge had disappeared, replaced by a blank field, like he was never there. "That's not right," she murmured. Across the room, Jason Carter looked down at his phone. His ex-post, the one where he wrote, "They just kicked out a black man in work boots," then tried to erase it, had already racked up 22,000 views. A reply came in live. "Is that Julian Brooks? The aviation guy?" Oh no, they messed up. The story was leaving the room. Fast. And inside, Terrence Mason was sweating. "Look," he snapped. "This is getting out of hand. We need to clear the lounge. There's a security breach, and we don't even know who this guy really is." Julian finally stepped forward. "You don't?" he asked calmly. "You've had my ID in your hand. You've had access to my name. You watched me scan in. You've had every opportunity to confirm who I am." Terrence glared. "Well, maybe your name isn't in the system anymore." Julian raised an eyebrow. "That's exactly the problem." And then came the turning point. Emily's voice rang out from behind the desk. "I just checked the system log. There was an unauthorized deletion in the last 3 minutes. A manual override. Whoever did it tried to scrub Mr. Brooks from the day's access record." The entire lounge seemed to pause. Jason whispered, "They're erasing him." Lamar, arms crossed, added, "Like he never walked in." Julian's phone buzzed. It was Harriet, his legal advisor. He answered silently on AirPods. "We've got a time-stamped shadow log of the deletion," Harriet said. "That's an internal policy violation. Federal access tampering. You're cleared to escalate." Julian nodded once, then turned back to Shelley. "Tell me, Ms. Harper," he said, "was it worth it? Hitting delete? Pretending I was never here?" She didn't answer. She just stared, wide-eyed, caught. Because in that moment, she realized something. You can delete a name from a screen, but you can't delete it from every phone in the room. And now, they were all recording. For 42 minutes, Julian Brooks had been patient. He let the system expose itself. He gave everyone in that room a chance to act with decency, to ask a simple question, to check the facts. They didn't. Instead, they chose assumption. They chose arrogance. They chose to humiliate him. Now, it was time to choose consequences. Julian took 2 deliberate steps forward, positioning himself dead center in the lounge. The room had gone silent, not by command, but by instinct. Everyone could feel the shift. The air felt different, like a storm rolling in through glass. He pulled a sleek black business card from the inside pocket of his coverall. Matte finish. Heavy stock. The kind of card that didn't just say who you were. It told people how much silence to keep when you entered a room. He held it up. No flair. No drama. "My name is Julian Everett Brooks," he said, voice steady, clear, and impossible to ignore. "I am chairman of the board of the Denver Aviation Authority. That includes this airport. That includes this terminal. That includes every employee in this building." Gasp. Audible. Someone dropped their coffee. Shelley froze mid-step. Terrence blinked like he'd seen a ghost. "I was appointed to this role 6 months ago," Julian continued. "We're in the process of auditing every airport facility under our governance for discrimination, credential abuse, and culture violations." He looked directly at Terrence now. "And what happened here today just became Exhibit A." Terrence stammered. You're not on the roster. You weren't in today's manifest." Julian tilted his head. "You mean the manifest your assistant manually altered 20 minutes ago?" "That manifest." He tapped his phone once. The lounge speakers, yes, the actual lounge intercom, suddenly echoed a new voice. "This is Harriet Coleman, legal advisor to Mr. Julian Brooks," came the calm, professional tone. "We have reviewed system logs confirming unauthorized deletions of executive access data. Federal Regulatory Council has been alerted. Termination protocols are now authorized." The sound ended, and so did the illusion of control. Shelley stepped back like she'd just seen her career fall through a trapdoor. Terrence looked for somewhere to stand, and found nowhere. From the side of the room, Mina stepped forward, holding her phone. "I recorded everything," she said. "I sent it to the board's compliance email 5 minutes ago." Julian nodded at her. "Thank you, Ms. Park. Courage doesn't wait for permission." He turned back to the group, speaking not just to staff, but to everyone watching, recording, live streaming. "This isn't about me," he said. "This is about what we allow behind polished doors. About what we assume when someone walks in without a designer suit." He took one final breath. "And about what changes when the man you underestimated turns out to sign your paycheck." Silence. Then a single clap. Then another. Until half the room was applauding. Not out of celebration, but relief. That someone had finally said what needed saying. Julian didn't smile. He just picked up his badge from the floor and pinned it back to his chest, where it always belonged. The applause faded, but the tension didn't. No one sat down. No one looked away. Every eye in the executive lounge was now fixed on one thing: what Julian would do next. Julian turned slowly, first toward Terrence, then Shelley. His voice never rose. It didn't need to. "Effective immediately," he said. "Both of you are relieved of duty." Terrence stiffened. You don't have the authority to." Julian cut him off. "I am the authority," he said flatly. "And you just crossed the line from ignorance into misconduct. Security clearance revocation is already in motion. You'll be escorted from the building." Shelley's mouth opened, ready to object. Nothing came out. Behind them, Emily Vasquez stood behind the desk, hands trembling slightly as she read the incoming admin order on her terminal. She looked up. They're locked out," she said quietly. "System revoked both of their profiles." Terrence's face turned pale. Julian stepped forward, but not to intimidate. He was done with that. This wasn't punishment. It was accountability. "To be clear," he said, "this isn't about me personally. It's about the culture you've nurtured in this space. One built on profiling, gatekeeping, and intimidation." He turned to the rest of the staff. The room was still thick with silence. "Let me say this now for the record. I will never tolerate power used to humiliate. Not in this airport. Not under my name." From the far side of the room, Lamar Dorsey spoke up. "Respect," he said simply, nodding toward Julian. Then, surprisingly, Mina Park stepped forward. "I just got an email from the board's DEI office," she said. "They've asked for a full account of what happened today. And a meeting." Julian nodded. "You'll attend it," he said. "As a witness. And as someone who chose the hard right over the easy wrong." Mina blinked. "Seriously?" "Seriously," Julian replied. "Courage like that deserves more than applause. It deserves action." As two uniformed officers entered quietly through the side entrance, not with handcuffs, but with firm direction, Terrence and Shelley were escorted out. No dramatic scene. No yelling. Just the quiet walk of consequence. Julian turned toward the remaining staff. "We all make choices," he said. "Today you watched mine. Tomorrow we'll see yours." And with that, the storm began to settle. But the aftershocks? They were just getting started. By the time Terrence and Shelley were out of sight, the impact of what had just happened was already rippling beyond the walls of the executive lounge. Julian stood near the center of the room, eyes focused, thumb gliding across his phone. He wasn't scrolling. He was activating. With one tap, he opened a secure app linked directly to the Denver Aviation Authority's Operations Command. And another tap triggered what only a handful of people in the country could initiate. Protocol 7B. Full compliance sweep. In less than 60 seconds, automated alerts were dispatched to 6 airports across Colorado: Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, and Grand Junction, all under Denver Aviation's jurisdiction. The directive was simple, but absolute. Effective immediately. Conduct full audit of access control logs, credential alterations, internal incident reports, and employee conduct files, with specific focus on discrimination patterns, unauthorized access revocations, and executive lounge incident history for the past 18 months. Priority flag: incidents involving employees of color, under 30, or in non-executive dress. In other words, they were blowing the lid off everything. Julian didn't say a word as he sent it. He didn't need to. From her desk, Emily Vasquez's monitor lit up as emails began flooding in. IT departments across the network were already responding. green dots blinking across a statewide dashboard. Some terminals froze, others showed access logs being backed up in real time. Mina Park stared, stunned. "You just triggered a system-wide review?" she asked. Julian gave a slight nod. "It was never just about this room," he said. "The culture that allowed what happened here isn't isolated. It's baked in." Just then, Harriet Coleman's voice crackled softly in Julian's earpiece. "Boards with you. James is already reviewing audit logs from Grand Junction. Early signs point to similar behavior there. At least 3 deleted entries in the last month, all tied to minority vendors." Julian exhaled through his nose. Not surprised. Just confirmed. "Send a memo to the FAA," he said. "Tell them we're cooperating fully, and that formal ethics investigations are now underway across all 6 hubs." "Already done," Harriet replied. Julian looked out across the lounge. A few passengers were still lingering, phones in hand, quiet but visibly moved. This wasn't just a dramatic moment anymore. This was the start of something bigger, because when injustice is systemic, the only response that matters is systemic correction. And that had just begun. The storm had passed. But Julian wasn't finished. Justice doesn't stop at exposure. It follows through. And Julian Brooks believed that when people stand up, they should be stood with. He turned to the center of the lounge, where Mina Park stood, still holding her phone, her chest rising and falling with quiet adrenaline. She had done what many wouldn't. She had spoken up first. Julian walked over to her, extended his hand, and said, "Effective immediately, you are being promoted from intern to full-time associate with the Denver Aviation Compliance Team. Your bravery didn't just record a moment, it preserved the truth." Mina's eyes widened. "Sir, are you serious?" Julian gave a small nod. "We don't just reward credentials. We reward character." A ripple of applause followed, smaller than earlier, but more personal. Then he turned to Emily Vasquez behind the front desk. "You didn't stay silent when you saw the logs disappear," Julian said. "You chose truth over convenience. As of next quarter, your role is being elevated to Senior Access Coordinator, and you'll assist in implementing integrity training across all 6 terminals." Emily covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "And Mr. Jason Carter," Julian added, turning to the passenger in the sport coat, "you didn't owe anyone your voice, but you gave it anyway. That's not something we forget." He pulled out a slim folder from his bag and handed it to Jason. Inside, a lifetime executive pass, good for priority boarding, VIP lounges, and full airport access across all Denver Aviation partner facilities. Jason blinked. "This is—" "I wasn't trying to," Julian interrupted. "Kindly. I know. And that's exactly why you deserve it." Finally, Julian addressed the remaining passengers, some still filming, others just processing what they'd witnessed. For every person in this room who chose to film, to speak, to step closer instead of stepping away, thank you. Moments like this change policies. But only when people decide silence is no longer acceptable. He stepped back, then tapped a final message into his phone. All affected guests from the 7 a.m. executive terminal incident are to receive full refunds, official apologies, and automatic upgrade to platinum travel status for life. No red tape. No forms. Just do it. Harriet replied in his ear a beat later. Confirmed. Already in motion. Julian looked around once more. The loudest part of the day was behind them, but the most powerful part was the quiet respect that remained. Just as the room began to settle, Julian's phone buzzed with a new message. This one wasn't from legal, or the board, or even Harriet. It was from an unlisted internal server, Aviation Ops Understood Internal, labeled, Anonymous Concern, read immediately. Julian opened it. The subject line was simple. It's bigger than you think. The message was short, but sharp. I've worked in this terminal for 9 years. I've seen 4 different black employees denied lounge access even after being cleared. 3 women in tech uniforms turned away at security because they didn't look official. And I've overheard at least 2 meetings where managers discussed how to subtly redirect the wrong image from executive areas. They tell us to watch for counterfeit behavior. But what they mean is, people who look like they don't belong. I've kept quiet. Until today. What you did gave me courage. Please, look deeper. You're only seeing the surface. Julian read it twice. Then a third time. He tucked the phone away slowly and stared through the lounge glass at the bustling runway beyond. He knew this wasn't isolated. But now it was organized, practiced, rehearsed, systemic. That letter wasn't just a plea. It was a whistle. And it hit him harder than he expected. Not just because of what it revealed, but because of where it took him. Suddenly, Julian was 24 again. Fresh out of grad school. Suit pressed. Resume in hand. Standing in the lobby of a regional airline in Atlanta. Waiting for a final round interview. He remembered how proud he'd been. How certain he was that his credentials would speak louder than his skin. But the interviewer barely looked up. We're looking for someone who reflects the image of the brand, he had said flatly, handing Julian's resume back without even reading it. That phrase, the image of the brand, had followed him like a shadow for years. It sat in boardrooms. It echoed in hangars. It whispered across terminals. And now, standing at the top of the very system that once turned him away, Julian understood something even more dangerous than direct discrimination. Design. This wasn't about rogue bad actors. This was about environments designed to preserve familiarity, even if it meant excluding the very people who made the system run. Julian turned back to the room, the echo of that memory still heavy on his breath. He looked at Mina, Emily, Lamar, and even the passengers who stood up. They weren't just witnesses. They were the first wave of something new. And that anonymous letter? It would be the foundation for a formal inquiry into culture-based profiling, not just in Denver, but in every major hub under Julian's authority. He pulled out his phone again and sent a voice command to Harriet. Start building a confidential channel for staff-wide anonymous reporting. Use protected encryption. Make it bulletproof. We're opening the door and keeping it open. Harriet replied a moment later. Copy that. First draft by end of day. We're calling it the Clear Path Program. Julian smiled faintly. Because change wasn't just coming. It had already started. The plane lifted off at 8:17 a.m. A little over an hour behind schedule. No one complained. Inside the cabin, the mood wasn't tense anymore. It was quiet, thoughtful, like the hush that follows a thunderstorm. Something had passed through this space, and no one who witnessed it would ever quite forget it. Julian Brooks sat in seat 1A. Not because of privilege, but because that's where his ticket, paid for, confirmed, and credentialed, had always said he belonged. He looked out the window, Denver slowly shrinking beneath him, the horizon folding into sky. But his mind wasn't up here. It was still back there, in that terminal, in that room with those people. He could still hear Mina's voice shaking but firm. He could see Emily nervously calling out the system override. He could feel the silence when the truth hit, when the mask of control slipped, and the crowd realized they weren't just watching a man get disrespected. They were watching a mirror held up to power. And for Julian, that's what it had always been about. Not revenge. Not making headlines. But making impact. He tapped a note into his phone, a message to the board of directors, marked for distribution across every terminal in the network. Respect doesn't come with a uniform. Dignity isn't earned through appearance. And power doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one that listens, stands up, and does the right thing when it costs something. That was the culture he came to build. Not one built on optics, but ethics. Not one based on status, but on substance. Outside his window, clouds moved like slow rivers. The captain's voice came on, announcing cruising altitude and estimated arrival. Julian leaned back, finally exhaling. Not because it was over, but because it had finally begun. And as the cabin lights dimmed, he thought about the real lesson, not just for airports, or corporations, or policies, but for all of us. We live in a world that constantly tells us to look the part, to dress like power, to sound like authority. But sometimes, the person who walks in quietly, in dusty boots and calloused hands, holds more wisdom, more backbone, and more integrity than the loudest person in a tailored suit. And the real tragedy is when we miss that, because we're too busy looking at the outside. Julian thought about that moment from years ago, being told he didn't reflect the brand. And how now, decades later, he was the brand, and he was going to redefine what that meant. As the flight settled into calm skies, he closed his eyes for just a second, because even leaders need rest, especially after they shake a system. And somewhere, in another city, in another terminal, a young intern was checking her badge. This time, it scanned green. No questions, no stares, because someone before her refused to stay quiet. And that's legacy.